The citadel of iron sky went quiet 11 seconds before the vote. Kael'thar felt it in his mandible first, a twitch he did not order. 327 years of conquest had taught him what silence before a vote meant. It never meant good news. He looked down at the report in his claw, 4 thin pages, the kind a species wrote when it had nothing to hide and less to defend. No significant orbital defenses detected. He almost laughed, almost. The chamber of the citadel rose around him in curved black rows, alloy carved from the husk of a world his grandfather had broken 1,000 years before he was born. Crimson light bled down from a dying star through the crystal ceiling, the same light that had watched 2,700 years of Vorkai certainty, the conclave seats filled with delegates who had never once voted against annexation and would not start today. The final tally scrolled across the display in cold white numbers, 378 for 11 against. Kael'thar did not need to check who the 11 were. He already knew one name and he despised her for it. Elder Thessa sat 2 tiers below him, small and gray and folded into herself the way Mavari folded when they were trying not to be noticed. 489 years old, and she had spent the last 47 of them saying the same quiet thing to a conclave that had stopped listening a long time ago. She was not looking at the tally. She was looking at a species classification file glowing faint blue on her own screen. A species the Dominion had labeled Category 7 Death World, and then astonishingly moved on from. "They will not fight," said the delegate beside her, not bothering to lower his voice. "They have never fought. 47 human colonies, and not one has raised a weapon against the Dominion in living memory. They have not needed to," Thessa said. He didn't hear her. Nobody ever did. Across the chamber, Kael'thar rose to his full 3 meters and let his voice fill the hall the way grinding stone fills a cave. "The vote stands. Earth kneels, or Earth burns. I will deliver the ultimatum myself." He did not ask Thessa what she remembered from Sector 14. He never had. That was, in the end, going to matter more than anything else said in that room. The ultimatum reached Meridian Station at 0347 hours, Sol Standard. Admiral Mira Marchetti was already awake. She was always awake at this hour, had been for 34 years, ever since the border incident taught her that the quiet before dawn was the only part of the day nobody could take from her. She poured black coffee into a chipped ceramic mug, the same mug she'd used since her first command, and she touched the dog tags at her throat before she touched anything else. Her father's tags, worn smooth at the edges. A service number you could still read if the light hit it right, and beneath the metal, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look, a data chip no wider than a grain of rice. She had worn them every day for 22 years. She touched them when she needed to remember that silence was not surrender. The message came through comms officer Priya Webb, who did not wait for permission before waking the Admiral's second monitor. "Ma'am, you'll want to see this." Marchetti read it once. Then she read it again, not because she'd missed anything, but because some sentences deserved a second look before you let them change your morning. "You will kneel, or you will perish. You have 5 of your minutes." She set the mug down. "Get me Vance," she said, "and wake Dr. Ortiz." Webb's fingers hesitated over the console. "Ma'am, Operation Sentinel hasn't been. It's been dormant for 47 years, Marchetti said. "I know how old it is, Lieutenant. I was 19 when they broke ground on it." She did not raise her voice. She never did. That was, Webb would think much later, the strangest part of the whole morning, that the woman who was about to unmake an empire's certainty spoke about it the way other people spoke about weather. 12 meters below the Nevada desert, in a room she had not left in 6 days, Dr. Helena Ortiz had been waiting for this message for most of her adult life. She was 62 now. She had been 15 when her mentor first showed her the blueprints, 31 when the first hull went dark and silent into the Kuiper Belt debris field, and every year since had been the same quiet arithmetic. Build, hide, wait, repeat, 87 ships. 3 generations of engineers, not one word spoken to any species, allied or otherwise. The room around her held 4 keys, 4 screens, and a silence so complete it had its own texture. She pressed the first key. Operation Sentinel. Authorization required. She pressed the second. Her hands did not shake. She had rehearsed this moment more times than she'd slept beside her husband, and both her parents had died without ever being told what their daughter did for a living. 47 years, she said to no one, because saying it out loud felt like something the moment deserved. Let's see if it was worth it. Captain Elias Vance had not seen Earth's sun in 14 years. He commanded the Black Armada from a bridge lit only by the pale blue glow of instrument panels, 87 ships arranged in a formation so still, so cold, that the debris field around them had long since stopped registering them as anything but rock. Black hull, light absorbing to the edge of what physics allowed. 24 torpedo tubes per vessel, 12 megaton yield per warhead. Numbers he had memorized the way other men memorized scripture. The order came through in 4 words. Engage. Jump pattern Delta 7. Vance closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them, and he was no longer a man who had waited 14 years. He was a man whose waiting was over. All ships, he said. Wake up! Back on the Citadel. Kael'thar received the human reply through a channel he had expected to carry either silence or begging. It carried neither. We refuse. We're not kneeling. Tell them that. 7 words, no name attached. No plea, no threat, no theater. He read it twice, the same way Marchetti had read his ultimatum, though for a very different reason. The first time he did not believe it. The second time, something in his chest, old unfamiliar, a thing 327 years of winning had never once required him to feel, made itself known as a small, cold weight. He dismissed it. Certainty, after all, did not leave room for weight. They refuse, he told his war room, and he laughed, and the laugh filled the chamber the way his voice always did. Advance the fleet, all 1,200 ships. I want their capital in view within the hour. Sub-Commander Vex, 189 years old and quieter than his commander liked, did not laugh. He had fought 6 campaigns. He had never once seen an enemy refuse without a plan behind the refusal. Sir, Vex said, the report says approximately 200 outdated ships, no significant orbital defenses. If that's true, why would they refuse? Because they are frightened animals who do not know the shape of their own extinction, Kael'thar said, and turned back to the display, and did not look at Vex again. Elder Thessa, watching from the observation tier, closed her eyes. She was remembering a world called Sector 14, 400 years gone, and a species that had also once said something quiet before everything changed. She did not speak. Nobody had ever listened when she did. Outside the Citadel, 1,200 Vorkai ships began to move. 87 black hulls in the Kuiper Belt held their formation and waited. The advance took 4 hours. 1,200 Vorkai ships crossed the outer dark in formation, and for 4 hours nothing answered them. No hail, no warning shot, no scrambling of defenses. Kael'thar stood on his flagship's command deck and watched the silence stretch, and he told himself it was the silence of a species too frightened to speak. Vex did not tell himself that. He had learned a long time ago that silence came in 2 kinds. The kind that meant nothing was there, and the kind that meant something was waiting. He kept the difference to himself. His commander did not like being contradicted twice in one day. Sir, Vex said instead, choosing his words the way a man chooses footing on ice. Their capital station shows no defensive posture at all. Not even a token screen. Because there's nothing to screen, Kael'thar said. 200 outdated ships do not build a wall. They build a funeral. He believed it. That was the thing about certainty 327 years deep. It did not require evidence anymore. It had become load-bearing. On Meridian Station, Marchetti finished her coffee and did not pour a second cup. She had a rule about that. 1 cup before a crisis, never 2. The second cup was for after, when there was something worth celebrating or something worth mourning, and either way you needed a clear head to know which. She set the chipped mug down on her desk, empty, and looked at the tactical display where 1,200 red icons crawled toward the edge of the Sol system like a slow bruise spreading across the dark. Webb hovered near the door. Ma'am, the Conclave's public channel is broadcasting the invasion. They're calling it a formality. Let them. Some of the colonies are asking if we're going to answer. Marchetti touched her father's dog tags, the way she always did, the metal warm from her skin rather than from the fabric of her uniform. We already answered, Lieutenant. 7 words. They just haven't finished hearing it yet. She did not explain what she meant. Webb didn't ask twice. There was something about the Admiral's stillness that made questions feel like they'd already been answered somewhere Webb wasn't invited to look. 400 years before, on a world called Sector 14, Elder Thessa had watched a different empire march toward a different silence, and she had been wrong about what that silence meant. She sat now on the Conclave's observation deck, alone, the crimson dying star light falling across her folded hands, and she let herself remember it properly for the first time in decades. Sector 14's people had not been building weapons in that silence. They had been building nothing at all. They had simply been dying, quietly, of a plague the Dominion never bothered to notice because noticing weak things was not what conquerors did. She had mistaken one silence for another once. It had cost her nothing personally. This time the silence had a shape to it. Power signatures that flickered in the Kuiper Belt debris field for a fraction of a second longer than natural rock should hold heat. It had cost an entire world everything. This time she had checked. A resource allocation pattern in human shipping routes that made no sense unless something enormous was being fed in secret, decade after decade, in a place nobody thought to look twice. She had told the Conclave. The Vorkai fleet crossed into what its instruments called effective engagement range, and Kael'thar gave the order to begin the bombardment sequence. Not fire yet, only the sequence. 11 had listened, 378 had not. "I hope I am wrong," she said to the empty deck, and did not believe herself even a little. The slow grinding wake-up of 1,200 weapons systems that had not needed to be more than decorative in over a century. It was the kind of order that should have felt like triumph. Instead, for 1/2 second, something in the tactical display caught his eye and refused to be dismissed. A shimmer in the Kuiper Belt debris field, gone before he could name it. The kind of thing a sensor glitch produced 1,000 times a day and meant nothing. He dismissed it anyway. That too was load-bearing. Vex did not dismiss it. He flagged the anomaly quietly on his own console and said nothing because he had learned that saying things to Kael'thar today accomplished exactly as much as saying them yesterday. 12 meters under the Nevada desert, Helena Ortiz watched the same shimmer on a screen of her own, except on her screen it wasn't a glitch. It was 87 fusion cores coming off 47 years of silence all at once, and she felt the whole room's air pressure change as the ventilation compensated for a heat bloom that shouldn't have existed and now gloriously did. She had built her entire adult life toward this exact instant. She let herself have 3 full seconds of feeling that before she went back to work. "Core temperature nominal across the array," she said into her console. "Tell Vance he's got everything I promised him." On the bridge of the lead Armada vessel, Captain Vance received that message and allowed himself nothing at all. No relief, no triumph, not even the small human luxury of a held breath let go. 14 years without sunlight had trained that out of him. "Formation holds until my mark," he told his fleet. "Nobody fires early. We do this once, and we do it right." Behind him, on every one of the 87 black hulls, torpedo tubes that had waited half a lifetime in silence began, one by one, to open. The Vorkai advance reached the edge of what their 4-page intelligence report had called empty space, and found it was not empty at all. Kael'thar's sensors screamed a warning his instincts had already half-formed and dismissed twice that day. 87 black shapes bloomed out of the debris field like something the dark itself had been keeping in reserve, and for the first time in 327 years, War Commander Kael'thar felt his certainty do something it had never once done in his presence. It hesitated. "Report," he snapped, and his voice cracked on the second syllable, a sound none of his officers had ever heard it make. Vex was already reading the numbers off his own display, and his voice, when it came, was very quiet. "Sir, those aren't outdated ships." On Meridian Station, Marchetti rose from her desk without hurrying, walked to the window that looked out on nothing but stars, and touched her father's dog tags one more time. "Tell the Armada," she said, "to no one and everyone, that they can begin. The first volley did not look like war. It looked like the dark itself catching fire. 2,000 warheads crossed the space between the fleets in under 4 seconds. Kael'thar had time to see them coming and no time to do anything about it. His shields flared, then failed, then simply stopped existing, along with the ships that had carried them. "Report," he shouted again, and this time no one answered fast enough to satisfy him. Vex's voice, when it came, had gone flat with something that wasn't fear. It was closer to arithmetic. "Forward carriers are gone, sir. All of them, 40 carriers. Gone before Kael'thar had finished drawing his next breath." On the bridge of the lead Armada vessel, Vance watched his tactical display fill with green success markers and felt none of it as victory. He had trained 14 years for restraint, and restraint was what he gave it now. Clipped orders, no wasted words. The fleet moving as one organism built by 3 generations of engineers who had never met each other. "Second wave," he said. "Hold spacing." Nobody breaks formation. 87 ships answered without a single voice raised. Marchetti received the first casualty report standing at her window, and she did not move from it. She had learned that stillness 34 years ago from a commander who told her that a leader who flinched taught her whole staff to flinch with her. 40 carriers destroyed, Webb read off, and her hands were shaking even if her voice wasn't. She touched her father's dog tags instead, and beneath the worn metal, the hidden data chip she had never once told anyone about, not Webb, not Vance, not even the Joint Chiefs, sat warm against her skin. "Ma'am, it's working. It was always going to work," Marchetti said. "That's why we built it." She did not smile, still holding whatever it was her father had trusted her to carry, and never explained. On the citadel of Iron Sky, the war room had gone very quiet. Kael'thar stood over the projection table, watching red icons vanish in clusters, and for the first time in 327 years he did not know what to say to the room. Certainty had always filled that silence for him before. It did not fill it now. Elder Thessa, watching the same feed from the observation deck, closed her eyes and did not open them for a long moment. She had been right. Being right had never once in 489 years felt like this. The battle did not have a middle. Support vessels tried to form a screen, and found the screen had nowhere left to stand. The Armada's second wave came through the gap the first had already opened. It had a beginning, and then it had an ending that arrived faster than anyone's mind could properly hold. And ships that had conquered 12 worlds over 2,700 years began dying in numbers too fast for any single officer to track. Vex stopped reporting numbers. He simply watched. Kael'thar gave an order to counterflank that no one executed, because there was no formation left intact enough to flank with. He gave a second order, also unexecuted. He was, for the first time since he had taken command, not being obeyed, and it took him 3 full seconds to understand that the silence in the room was not respect. It was people who no longer believed he knew what to do. Somewhere in the middle of it, Vance allowed himself one thing, a single, ordinary human gesture. The kind that meant nothing and everything. He reached for the water bottle clipped beside his console, unscrewed the cap, and drank. Not because he was thirsty, because his hands needed something to do that wasn't giving another order for 4 seconds, and because a man who had waited 14 years for this morning was allowed 1 sip of water in the middle of it. Then he set the bottle down and gave the order that mattered most. "Close the gap. Push them back toward the citadel. Don't let them regroup." Kael'thar felt the retreat order form in his own mouth before he understood he was giving it. It tasted like something he had never tasted before, and it took him a long moment to name it: defeat. "Fall back," he said, and the words came out wrong, too small for a voice built to fill chambers. "All ships, fall back to the citadel." 600 ships tried, not all of them made the jump. Vex watched his commander give the order and felt something shift loose in his chest that had been fastened down for 6 campaigns and 189 years. He had followed Kael'thar into every one of those campaigns without once questioning the shape of the man's certainty. He was questioning it now. It was Thessa who finally spoke into a comm channel that had gone eerily silent across the entire conclave observation deck. Her voice was small, it always had been. But this time, in the wreckage of the vote that had ignored her, people listened. "Play the human transmission again," she said. "The one from this morning? I want to hear it." The words filled the deck a second time, no less strange for repetition. "We refuse. We're not kneeling. Tell them that." 7 words, Thessa said, mostly to herself. "We spent 4 pages telling ourselves what they couldn't do. They spent 47 years proving us wrong without saying a single one of them out loud." No one answered her. For the first time in decades, no one needed to. On Meridian Station, the final numbers began arriving in fragments, the way truth always arrives after something this large: one piece, then another, until the shape of it can no longer be denied. 11 minutes had passed since Vance gave the order to fire. 800 Vorkai ships would not be going home. Marchetti read the count once, and did not read it again. She had learned a long time ago that some numbers only needed to be looked at a single time to be understood forever. Kael'thar's flagship made the jump back to the citadel, with less than half its hull intact, and when he walked into the war room this time, no one rose for him. That was the detail that told him everything. 327 years, and he had never once entered a room without every officer in it coming to attention. They did now. Eventually, a half-second too late, the kind of delay that meant nothing to a stranger and everything to a commander who had spent his whole life reading rooms, Vex was already there. He had made the jump on an earlier ship, and he was not looking at the tactical display anymore. He was looking at Kael'thar. 600 ships returned, Vex said. 400 did not. Kael'thar opened his mouth to give an order. Any order, the reflex of a lifetime, and found he had nothing to say that the room would still obey. He closed it again. Sir, Vex said, and his voice had none of the deference it used to carry. The conclave is requesting your presence, immediately. It was not a request. Kael'thar understood that the way he understood very little else that day. He stood before the conclave an hour later, and no one shouted at him, which was somehow worse than shouting would have been. 378 delegates who had voted for annexation sat in a silence that had teeth in it. Elder Thessa sat among them, not gloating, not even looking directly at him, simply present, the way a fact is present once it has stopped being an opinion. You told this body there were no significant defenses, the speaker said. You told this body 200 outdated ships. You have cost the Dominion 400 vessels and tens of thousands of lives on a report you did not verify. Kael'thar had no certainty left to offer them. It had all been spent in 11 minutes somewhere over a debris field he had once called empty. Command is reassigned, the speaker said. Effective immediately. War Commander Kael'thar is relieved. No execution, no public shaming beyond the plain fact of the words. 327 years of conquest ended not with a blade, but with a sentence delivered in the same flat tone the speaker might have used to reassign a shipping manifest. Kael'thar stood very still and understood, for the first time, what it felt like to be a report someone else had failed to verify. Vex did not stay to watch the rest. He had a fleet to help rebuild, and for the first time in 189 years, orders he intended to question before he followed them. On Meridian Station, the celebration Marchetti had expected from her staff never quite arrived. There was relief. She could see it in the way Webb's shoulders dropped, in the way officers up and down the corridor allowed themselves to breathe out for what looked like the first time all day, but nobody cheered. 87 ships had come home. Not one had been lost. Still, tens of thousands of Vorkai dead sat heavy in a room built by people who had spent 47 years hoping they would never have to use what they'd built. Marchetti walked to the window again. It was the same window. It always would be, she thought, the same stars, the same dark, the same quiet that had held for 47 years and had finally this morning been asked to do something other than wait. She thought of her father then, the way she always did at this hour, whether or not there had been a battle. He had worn these tags into a different war, against a different enemy, on a morning that must have felt very much like this one. He had never told her what to do with the chip beneath the metal. He had only ever told her one thing, over and over, until it stopped being advice and became something closer to inheritance. We don't kneel. We never have. She had printed those words once, years ago, on a single sheet of paper she kept folded in her desk drawer, instead of on any screen a system could wipe or a hand could delete from a distance. She had never told anyone why. It had simply felt, at the time, like the kind of thing that should exist somewhere no one could reach it but her. She understood now, standing at the window, why that had mattered. Paper could not be erased by an enemy who had already tried twice to erase quieter things. Captain Vance brought the Armada home to a debris field that no longer needed to hide anything, and for the first time in 14 years he stepped onto a deck without immediately calculating how much longer the silence needed to hold. He drank the last of the water in his bottle. It tasted the same as it had this morning. That more than anything told him the war was actually over. Elder Thessa found Marchetti 3 days later on a station corridor neither of them had ever walked before, two women from species that had barely spoken to each other in 400 years of shared galactic history. Sector 14, Thessa said, without preamble, because 489 years had taught her that preambles were often just another way of staying quiet. I misjudged a silence there once. It cost a world everything. I did not want to misjudge yours. You didn't, Marchetti said. No, Thessa agreed. I don't think I did. Neither of them said anything else. It was, in its way, exactly the kind of conversation both of them understood best. The Conclave's classification files were updated within the month. Category 7 Death World remained, technically, an accurate label. Humanity had never stopped being difficult to kill. But beside it now sat a new notation, added by a clerk who had not been told to add it and did it anyway. Because some truths write themselves once they've been proven. Silence. Not to be read as absence of strength. No one ever removed it. No one asked who had written it. Marchetti stood alone in her quarters that night, the chipped mug empty on the desk beside her, the dog tags resting against her collarbone the way they had every night for 22 years. She unclasped them once and turned them over in her palm, tracing the worn service number with her thumb the way she had as a child. Before she understood what it meant to inherit a war, she did not put them back on right away. She held them a moment longer than she needed to, the small data chip beneath the metal catching the low light of her quarters, still holding whatever her father had trusted her to carry and never once explained. Then she fastened the tags around her neck, turned off the light, and let the station's quiet settle back into the shape it had held for 47 years, no longer a silence built to hide something, but one that had simply, finally been allowed to rest. Outside her window, the stars did not change. They never had. We did not know what we were waking.